The stagecoach was 3 days late. Caleb Vance stood on the porch of his ranch house, one boot propped against the weathered railing, watching the eastern horizon like it owed him money. The Wyoming sun beat down merciless and white, turning the air into something you could chew. Dust devils spun across the scrubland, and somewhere out in that emptiness, a woman he'd never laid eyes on was supposed to be coming to marry him. Not for love. He wasn't fool enough to pretend otherwise. June needed a mother. His daughter was 7 years old, wild as a coyote pup, and growing up harder than any child should have to. Since Sarah died 2 winters back, the girl had learned to cook beans, mend her own clothes, and sleep with a knife under her pillow when the wind howled wrong. Caleb had tried. He'd tried like hell. But a man could only split himself so many ways before the seams showed, and his were showing bad. So he'd done what desperate men did. He'd written a letter. Widower. Cattle ranch, 640 acres, modest house. 1 daughter. Seeking woman of good character for marriage and homemaking. Must be strong, reliable, and willing to work. Romance not required. Honesty is. He'd been honest, at least. More honest than most of the men who put advertisements in those eastern papers, promising riches and easy living. Caleb had promised exactly what he had: hard work, isolation, and a child who needed raising. 3 women had written back. 2 had changed their minds after follow-up letters describing the reality of ranch life. The loneliness, the wind that never stopped, the nearest town 12 miles of rough road away. The 3rd had been Eliza Hartwell, a schoolteacher from Philadelphia whose letters were careful and clear-eyed. She hadn't written about love or destiny. She'd written about practicality, about needing a fresh start, about understanding that partnership could be built on mutual respect rather than fairy tales. I am not fragile, she'd written in her last letter, though I suspect you imagine all city women are. I can learn what I don't know. I can work, and I will care for your daughter as if she were my own blood. That much I can promise you. He'd believed her, or wanted to. Hell, maybe it was the same thing. Papa? June appeared in the doorway behind him, her dark hair escaping from the braid he'd managed that morning. She had her mother's eyes, sharp and brown, and too knowing for a child. Stage ain't coming today either, is it? She said. Might be delayed. Weather, maybe. Or she changed her mind. Caleb turned to look at his daughter. She stood with her arms crossed, bare feet planted on the worn floorboards, her expression caught between hope and the kind of resignation no 7-year-old should carry. We don't know that, he said. Mrs. Chen says ladies from the city always change their minds. Says they get out here and see how it really is, and they run right back to where they came from. Mrs. Chen talks too damn much. You gonna make me wash my mouth out if I say damn? Probably. June almost smiled. Almost. Then her face went serious again. I don't need a new mama, you know. We do fine. Just us. Caleb's chest went tight. They didn't do fine. They survived, which wasn't the same thing at all. But he couldn't say that to her. I know, Junebug, but the sound of hoofbeats cut him off. Fast hoofbeats, coming hard from the direction of town. Caleb's hand went instinctively to his hip, where his revolver sat. Out here, nobody rode that fast unless something was wrong. The rider came into view, young Tommy Peterson from the general store, his horse lathered and blowing. The kid nearly fell off pulling up in front of the porch. Mr. Vance! Tommy's voice cracked high with urgency. Mr. Vance, you gotta come to town right now. Sheriff needs you. Caleb's gut went cold. What happened? Stagecoach. Tommy was breathing hard, words tumbling out. The one from Cheyenne. They found it about 15 miles out near Devil's Canyon, overturned. Drivers dead, horses scattered. They're saying it was Comanche, but... Passengers? Caleb's voice came out harder than he meant. Tommy's face went pale. One dead they could find. An old man. But there were supposed to be 3 people on that stage, Mr. Vance. They only found 1 body. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Caleb gripped the porch railing, his knuckles going white. The woman, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir, Miss Hartwell. She was listed on the manifest, but there's no sign of her. No body, no tracks leading away that they can find. Sheriff's organizing a search party, but with the sun like it is, and how long it's been. Tommy trailed off, not needing to finish. In this heat, In that terrain, 3 days without water meant one thing. June made a small sound behind him, quickly stifled. "Tell the sheriff I'm coming," Caleb said. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. "Tell him to wait for me before they ride out." "Yes, sir." Tommy wheeled his horse around and took off back toward town, dust billowing behind him. Caleb stood very still, his mind racing through calculations he didn't want to make. 3 days in the sun, 15 miles from town, which meant 27 miles from here. Devil's Canyon was all exposed rock and sand, no shade, no water. Even if she'd survived the attack, even if she'd walked away from that overturned stage. "She's dead, ain't she?" June's voice was small. Caleb turned. His daughter's face had gone carefully blank, the way it did when she was trying not to feel things. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm going to find out. Can I come?" "No." "Papa." "No, June." He made his voice gentle but firm. "You're going to go stay with the Chens until I get back." "I don't want to stay with the Chens. Mrs. Chen smells like old cabbage, and she makes me practice piano. I don't care if she smells like a dead skunk and makes you practice Latin. You're staying there, and that's final." June's jaw set in that stubborn way that was pure Sarah. "You're going to go find her even though she's probably dead." "Yes." "Why? You don't even know her." Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with his daughter. "How did you explain to a child that sometimes you made promises to people you'd never met? That sometimes hope was the only thing standing between you and giving up entirely? Because she got on that stage for us," he said finally. "She packed up her whole life and traveled 1,000 miles because I asked her to. Because we needed her. That means something, Junebug. That means I don't give up until I know for sure." June's eyes were too bright. "And if she's dead, then we keep going, same as always." It was the truth, but it sat bitter on his tongue. He pulled June into a hug, feeling how small she still was despite all her toughness. She let him hold her for exactly 3 seconds before pulling away, swiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You better come back," she said fiercely. "Always do." He saddled his horse, a big roan gelding named Red, who'd carried him through worse than this, and loaded saddlebags with supplies. Water, jerky, ammunition, rope, his bedroll, and bandages, because some part of him that was either hopeful or stupid couldn't quite let go of the possibility. The ride to town took 45 minutes. Caleb used the time to think, to plan, to prepare himself for what he might find. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a pale, merciless dome. Heat shimmered off the ground in waves that made the distant mountains look like they were underwater. Cedar Falls wasn't much of a town, a main street of packed dirt, maybe 24 buildings total, and a population that swelled to 300 if you counted all the outlying ranches. But it was what they had. The general store, the saloon, the church, the school that had been closed since the last teacher left, and the sheriff's office that also served as the jail when needed. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Caleb recognized most of them. Ben Chen and his wife, the Petersons, old Doc Fairbanks, a handful of ranch hands from neighboring spreads. They parted to let him through, their faces wearing that careful sympathy people put on when they think you're about to get bad news. Sheriff Hayes met him at the door. Hayes was a solid man in his 50s, weathered and competent, with a mustache that drooped past his chin. "Caleb," he said quietly, "glad you're here. What do we know?" Hayes led him inside, where a map was spread across his desk. Stage left Cheyenne 4 days ago. Should have been here 2 days ago. When it didn't show, I sent riders out to backtrack the route. Found it here. He pointed to a spot on the map marked in pencil. Devil's Canyon, about a mile past the Cooper Springs turnoff. Stage was overturned, left wheel smashed to pieces. Driver, Jackson Wells, you know him, shot twice in the chest. Dead maybe 3 days, near as Doc can tell. "Comanche?" Caleb asked, though his gut told him otherwise. "Don't think so. Wrong territory, wrong time of year. And they would have taken the horses. These were just scattered. One dead in the traces, the others wandered off. We rounded up 2 of them. They're skittish, but not mistreated." Hayes paused. "I think it was bandits. Made it look like Comanche work to throw us off." "The passengers?" "Found one body about 20 yards from the stage. Older man manifest says his name was Porter, merchant from Cheyenne. Looks like he tried to run, got shot in the back. Hayes's voice went grim. The woman, Miss Hartwell, no sign of her, no body, no blood trail we could find in the immediate area. Could be she was thrown clear when the stage went over. Could be she ran and they took after her. But Caleb, he met Caleb's eyes. It's been 3 days in this heat. Even if she wasn't hurt, even if she found shade somehow. I know the odds, Caleb said shortly. I'm riding out anyway. I figured. Got 6 men ready to go with you. We'll split into pairs, cover more ground that way. Caleb nodded, already running through gear checks in his mind. How much daylight we got? Maybe 7 hours if we leave now. We can push through dusk if we need to, but tracking in the dark. Hayes shrugged. Then we'd better stop talking and start moving. The search party assembled quickly. Caleb knew most of the men, ranch hands and drifters, the kind who could sit a horse all day and read terrain like other men read newspapers. Hayes divided them into 3 pairs, assigned search sectors, and laid out the plan. They'd fan out from the crash site, each pair taking a different arc. Look for tracks, disturbed ground, anything that might indicate someone on foot. They'd fire signal shots if they found something. The ride out to Devil's Canyon took 2 hours. Nobody talked much. The land got rougher as they went, the grass giving way to scrub and then to bare rock and sand. Heat rose off the ground in waves, turning the air into something thick and difficult. Caleb's canteen was already half empty by the time they reached the site. The stagecoach looked like a broken toy. It lay on its side, the left wheel splintered into pieces, the door hanging open like a screaming mouth. Dark stains marked the driver's seat where Jackson Wells had bled out. The horses were gone except for one, still tangled in the traces, bloated and drawing flies. The smell hit like a fist. Christ, muttered one of the ranch hands, a kid named Miller who couldn't be more than 19. He turned away, hand over his mouth. Caleb dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. Up close, the violence was obvious. Bullet holes in the coach body. Scattered luggage, torn open and rifled through. Broken glass glittering in the sun. This hadn't been a simple robbery. Someone had been angry, or thorough, or both. He walked a slow circle around the wreckage, reading the story written in dust and blood. The stage had been moving fast when it went over, probably trying to outrun the attackers. The driver had been shot first, lost control. The coach had hit something, maybe a rock, and flipped. Passengers thrown clear or trapped inside. Then the bandits had come in close, finished what they started. Caleb. Hayes was crouched about 30 feet away, near a scraggly mesquite bush. Got something here. Caleb joined him. The sheriff was pointing at the ground, at a scuff mark in the dust that might have been nothing or might have been a footprint. Small. Could have been a woman's boot. Could also be Porter's, Hayes said, echoing Caleb's thoughts. He was a small man. Which way does it lead? They followed the faint marks, losing them, picking them up again. The trail, if it was a trail, led away from the crash site, heading roughly northeast, toward nothing, just more rock and sand and heat. This don't make sense, like, Hayes said after they'd gone maybe 100 yards. If she was running, she'd head for the road, for town. This goes deeper into the wasteland. Unless she was confused, Caleb said. Hurt, in shock, not thinking straight. Or dragged. The words sat between them like a stone. Caleb's jaw tightened. He didn't want to think about that possibility, about what might have happened to a woman alone with men who'd already killed twice. They kept searching. The other pairs had fanned out, covering their sectors. Hours passed. The sun climbed to its peak and started its slow descent. The heat was brutal, physical, a living thing that pressed down and squeezed the air from your lungs. Caleb drank sparingly from his canteen and kept moving, eyes on the ground, looking for any sign, any clue. Nothing. By mid-afternoon, they'd found exactly nothing. No more tracks, no torn fabric, no drops of blood. It was like Eliza Hartwell had simply vanished into the desert air. The men were starting to get that look, the one that said they were thinking about their own water supplies, about the long ride back, about how a body could die a dozen ways out here and might never be found. Caleb, Hayes rode up beside him, his horse's head drooping with the heat. We need to think about turning back soon. Horses are suffering, men are running low on water. Another hour, Caleb said. "It's been almost 4. We've covered every inch of reasonable ground. If she walked this far in her condition, she's another hour." Hayes studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 1 hour. Then we head back, regroup, come at it fresh tomorrow. Caleb knew tomorrow might be too late. Hell, today might already be too late. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. Something in him, pride or guilt, or just plain stubbornness, wouldn't let him ride away without knowing. He pushed Red harder, riding in widening circles, scanning the landscape for anything that didn't belong. The land here was harsh, all exposed rock and sparse vegetation, with occasional draws and washes where flash floods had carved temporary channels. Good places to die, those washes. Shaded sometimes, which your heat-addled brain might think meant safety, but it just meant you'd cook slower. He was riding along the edge of one such wash when Red suddenly balked, tossing his head and sidestepping. Caleb pulled up, frowning. The gelding was usually steady, not prone to spooking at shadows. "Easy," he murmured, running a hand along Red's neck. "What is it, boy?" Then he smelled it, faint, almost lost in the hot wind, but there, the copper-sweet smell of blood. Caleb's pulse kicked up. He dismounted, tied Red to a scrub bush, and moved forward on foot. The wash was maybe 8 feet deep, the sides crumbling dirt and rock. He peered over the edge, careful, not wanting to disturb any evidence. At first he saw nothing but shadows and stones. Then his eyes adjusted, and his heart stopped. There, in the deepest shadow at the base of the wash, something that might have been a pile of rags, or might have been a person. Dark fabric, a hand, pale against the dirt. And blood. Not fresh, but not old either, dried to rust brown but still visible. "Jesus," Caleb breathed. He scrambled down into the wash, rocks sliding under his boots. Up close, the truth was unmistakable. It was a woman. She lay on her side, partially curled, her dark traveling dress torn and filthy. Her face was turned away, hair matted with dirt and blood. One arm was flung out, fingers curled like she'd been reaching for something. And her legs. Christ, her legs. Both were bent at angles that made Caleb's stomach turn. Not broken, crushed, like something impossibly heavy had rolled over them and kept going. The fabric of her dress was stiff with dried blood, and her boots, good leather boots that probably cost more than Caleb made in a month, were split and ruined. He dropped to his knees beside her, hands shaking as he reached for her throat, feeling for a pulse. Her skin was hot as a stove, dry as paper. He couldn't find anything at first, and his heart sank. Too late. You're too late. She died alone in this hole while you were... there. Faint as a whisper, irregular as hell, but there. A pulse. "Holy God," Caleb said. "You're alive." He fumbled for his canteen, got it open, tilted her head back carefully. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, swollen almost shut. He dribbled a tiny amount of water into her mouth, watching to make sure she swallowed, that she didn't choke. Some instinct made her throat work, and he gave her a little more. Her eyelids fluttered. For a second, he thought she might wake, might look at him. But she just made a small sound, barely human, more like a wounded animal, and went still again. Caleb sat back on his heels, his mind racing. She was alive, but barely. 3 days in this heat, grievously injured, probably in shock. The fact that she'd survived at all was close to miraculous. But she wasn't out of danger, not even close. He needed to get her out of this wash, get her cooled down, get fluids in her. And those legs, Christ, those legs would need setting, and soon, or she'd lose them to infection, even if the breaks themselves didn't kill her. "Hayes!" He shouted it with everything he had, the sound echoing off the rocks. "Hayes! Here! I found her!" He heard answering shouts, the sound of horses. Relief flooded through him, quickly replaced by urgency. Moving her was going to hurt her, probably badly. But leaving her here while he rode for help wasn't an option either. Hayes appeared at the edge of the wash, his eyes going wide. "Alive?" "Barely. We need to get her up, get her cooled down. Careful. Her legs are crushed bad." 2 more men appeared. Miller and a grizzled ranch hand named Dutch. Together, they managed to get a rope under her arms and lift her out of the wash as gently as they could. She made that sound again, that broken animal whimper, but didn't wake. Maybe that was mercy. In full sunlight, she looked worse. Her face was blistered from sun exposure, her lips split and bleeding. The left side of her head bore a massive bruise, the kind that meant probable skull fracture. Her dress was torn down one side, revealing more bruises, more blood. And those legs. How the hell is she even alive? Miller breathed. I don't know, Caleb said honestly, but we need to move fast. Dutch, ride back to town. Get Doc Fairbanks out here with his wagon. Tell him to bring every blanket he's got and all the water he can carry. Go. Dutch was already moving, swinging into his saddle and taking off at a gallop. What about us? Hayes asked. Caleb looked around. The sun was maybe 2 hours from setting, and they were a good 3 hours from town, even riding hard. She wouldn't survive that trip, not in her condition. He made a decision. There's an old line shack about a mile north of here, just off the Copper Springs Trail. Been abandoned for years, but it'll have walls and a roof. We take her there, get her out of this sun, try to stabilize her until Doc arrives. That shack's barely standing, Hayes said doubtfully. It's better than this. Help me get her on my horse. It took all three of them to manage it. Caleb mounted first, then they lifted Eliza, because that's who she had to be. Who else could she be? And settled her across his lap. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel the fever radiating off her like heat from a furnace. She was burning up from the inside. Easy, he murmured, though she probably couldn't hear him. Easy now. I got you. The ride to the line shack was the longest mile of Caleb's life. He held her as gently as he could, but Red's gait still jarred her broken body. Every step seemed to punch another small sound of pain from her throat. Caleb gritted his teeth and kept going. The shack appeared through the heat shimmer like a mirage. Weathered gray wood, sagging roof, one window with no glass. But it had walls, and those walls meant shade. Hayes and Miller dismounted first, kicked the door open, cleared out the worst of the debris inside. There was an old bed frame with no mattress, just rope webbing that had mostly rotted through. It would have to do. They got her inside, laid her on the bed frame as carefully as possible. Caleb stripped off his shirt, dunked it in his canteen, and started bathing her face and arms, trying to bring the fever down. Hayes tore strips from his own shirt to use as bandages, starting the grim work of cleaning her wounds. These legs, Hayes said quietly. Caleb, I ain't a doctor, but I know. Even if we save them, she might never walk right again. Might never walk at all. I know. What he didn't say was, as long as she lives, that was all that mattered right now. Everything else could be figured out later. Miller kept watch outside while Caleb and Hayes worked. They cleaned what they could clean, bandaged what they could bandage. Caleb got more water into her, a few drops at a time. At one point her eyes opened, just a slit, unfocused and glassy with fever, and she looked at him without seeing him. Please, she whispered. The word was barely audible. Please, you're safe, Caleb told her. I got you. You're safe now. Her eyes closed again. He wasn't sure she'd heard him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red when they heard the wagon approaching. Doc Fairbanks arrived with Dutch driving, the wagon bed loaded with supplies. The doc was a spare man in his 60s, all wire and competence, with the steady hands of someone who'd seen everything at least twice. He took one look at Eliza and let out a low whistle. Well, hell, she should be dead. But she's not, Caleb said. It came out harder than he meant. No, Doc agreed. She's not. Which means we'd better figure out how to keep her that way. You men clear out. I need room to work. They retreated outside, leaving the doc to his grim business. Caleb stood in the dying light, his hands shaking with exhaustion and something else he couldn't name. Miller built a small fire. Hayes passed around jerky and hardtack, but Caleb couldn't eat. Inside the shack, he could hear Doc Fairbanks moving around, talking to himself the way he did when he worked. Occasionally, Eliza made sounds, screams, really, though they came out more like gasps because she didn't have the strength for full screaming. Caleb made himself stand still, made himself not go back inside. Doc knew what he was doing. Interfering would only make it worse. It was full dark when Doc emerged, wiping blood from his hands on a rag. She's alive, he said without preamble. For now. Both legs are crushed, left femur compound fracture, right leg multiple breaks from knee to ankle, couple cracked ribs, probable concussion, severe dehydration, and the worst sunburn I've seen in 30 years, plus infection starting in at least 3 of the wounds. Can you save the legs? Caleb asked. Doc hesitated. I set them as best I could, but honestly, Caleb, the smart thing might be to, can you save them? Maybe, if the infection doesn't get worse. If she doesn't develop gangrene, if the bones heal straight, which is a big if, with breaks this bad. And even then, she's looking at months of recovery, and she might never walk without a cane. But she could walk. Could, might. These aren't promises, understand? This is pure luck and prayer territory. Caleb nodded slowly. What does she need? Rest, water, food when she can take it. The wounds cleaned and rebandaged twice daily. And most of all, time. I've done what I can for now, but she needs proper care, proper nursing. She shouldn't be moved for at least a week, maybe 2. Doc paused. You thinking of keeping her here? Caleb looked at the sagging line shack, then back at Doc. How would I get her to town without killing her? You probably couldn't, but you can't stay out here indefinitely either. This place is... I'll make it work. Hayes stepped forward. Caleb, think about this. You got a daughter to look after, a ranch to run. You can't just camp out in this shack playing nursemaid to a woman who might not even survive the night. June's with the Chens. Ranch can handle itself for a few days. Caleb's voice was flat, final. I'm staying. The men exchanged looks. Finally, Hayes sighed. All right. We'll ride back, let folks know what's what. I'll send someone out tomorrow with more supplies, blankets, food, medicine. And I'll check on June, make sure she knows you're all right. Appreciate it. They left him there, Caleb Vance, alone in a falling down shack with a dying woman he'd never met, in the middle of the Wyoming wasteland. Doc had left instructions, bandages, laudanum for the pain. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. Caleb went back inside. Eliza lay on the bed frame, swaddled in blankets despite the heat because Doc said she needed to sweat out the fever. Her face was pale under the sunburn, her breathing shallow and quick. One of her hands had worked free of the blankets, and Caleb found himself taking it without thinking. Her fingers were long and elegant, a city woman's hands. But there were calluses too, from holding chalk probably, or pen. A teacher's hands. Hands that would never be quite the same after this. I'm sorry, he said quietly, though she couldn't hear him. I'm sorry you came all this way for this. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the gaps in the walls. Somewhere a coyote howled, answered by another. The desert night settled in, full of small sounds and vast silence. Caleb pulled up the one intact chair he'd found, positioned it beside the bed, and settled in for a long night. He'd done hard things before. Buried his wife, raised his daughter alone, survived droughts and harsh winters, and all the casual cruelties the land could dish out. But this felt different. This felt like standing at the edge of something he didn't fully understand, holding onto a stranger's hand, hoping she'd live long enough for him to learn her name from her own lips. Through the window, stars emerged one by one, hard and bright and indifferent. The fever would break or it wouldn't. The infections would heal or they wouldn't. She would live or she would die. And all Caleb could do was wait and watch and refuse to let go. In the darkness, Eliza's hand tightened slightly around his. Just a twitch, nothing more. But Caleb chose to take it as a sign. She was still fighting. After 3 days in hell, after being crushed and burned and left for dead, some part of her was still fighting. That's right, he murmured. You hold on. You made a promise, remember? You said you weren't fragile. So prove it. Hold on. The night deepened. The fever raged. And in that broken-down shack in the middle of nowhere, 2 people who'd never met fought separate battles that had somehow become the same war. One to live, one to keep the other alive. Neither was winning yet, but neither was ready to surrender either. The fever broke on the 3rd night, but not the way Caleb had hoped. He'd dozed off in the chair sometime after midnight, his chin on his chest, Eliza's hand still caught in his. The sound of her thrashing jerked him awake so hard he nearly fell over. She was fighting the blankets, her head whipping side to side, mouth open in a scream that had no air behind it. No, she gasped. No, please, the horses. Get the horses. Caleb grabbed her shoulders, trying to keep her still without hurting her worse. Her skin was slick with sweat, the fever finally breaking, but her eyes were wide open and seeing things that weren't there. The crash, probably. reliving it. "You're safe," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're not there anymore. You're safe." She didn't hear him. Her hands clawed at his arms, surprisingly strong for someone half dead. "They're coming back," she choked out. "They're coming back. We have to run." "Nobody's coming. It's just you and me. You're in a line shack about a mile from where we found you. The men who did this are long gone." Her eyes focused on him for half a second, then slid away again. "Who are you?" "Caleb Vance. I'm—" He paused. What was he exactly? Her husband-to-be? A stranger? "I'm the one who wrote the letters." That seemed to reach her somehow. Her struggles weakened. She stared at him, her pupils blown wide with pain and laudanum and fever dreams. "You came." "Yeah, I came. Didn't think—" Her words slurred. "Didn't think anyone would." Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp, dropping into unconsciousness so fast it scared him worse than the thrashing had. Caleb felt for her pulse, found it racing but strong. The fever was down, he realized. Not gone, but down. Her forehead was cooler under his palm, the sweat drying on her skin. Small victories. He'd learned to take them where he could find them. The next 2 days blurred together into a rhythm of small tasks and smaller progress. Caleb changed her bandages, following Doc's instructions as best he could. The wounds were ugly, torn skin, deep bruising, places where the bone had pushed through and Doc had to force it back. He cleaned them with whiskey that made her whimper even in sleep, packed them with clean cloth, wrapped everything tight. Her legs were splinted with pieces of wood Doc had left, bound with strips of torn sheet. They looked like broken toys, awkward and wrong. Caleb tried not to think about what she'd look like trying to walk on them, if she ever could. Hayes came by on the second day with supplies. More blankets, food, a bottle of Doc's homemade fever remedy that smelled like turpentine and probably worked about as well. He'd brought news too. "Town's talking," Hayes said, helping Caleb unload the wagon. "Half think you're a fool for staying out here. Other half think you're a saint." "Neither one's true." "Probably not. How's she doing?" Caleb glanced back at the shack. Through the open door, he could see Eliza's still form on the bed. "Alive. That's about all I can say for certain. Doc says if she makes it through the week, she's got a real chance. And if she doesn't?" Hayes didn't answer that. Instead, he said, "Your daughter's asking about you. Mrs. Chen says she's being difficult. June's always difficult. More than usual, I mean. Won't eat, won't talk. Just sits by the window watching the road." Hayes shifted his weight. "Maybe you should come back to town, even just for a day. Let the girl know you're all right." Caleb shook his head. "Can't leave her. Not yet." "Caleb?" "I said no." He heard the snap in his own voice and took a breath. "Tell June I'm fine, to tell her I'll be home soon as I can, and tell her—" He paused, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like empty promises. "Tell her Miss Hartwell is fighting hard." "That's what she'd want to know." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "You don't even know this woman?" "Doesn't seem to matter much, does it?" After Hayes left, Caleb went back inside. The afternoon heat was building, turning the shack into an oven despite the shade. He'd rigged a wet sheet over the window to cool the air, but it only helped so much. Eliza's breathing had gone shallow again, her face flushed. He dipped a cloth in the water bucket and bathed her face, her neck, her arms where they lay outside the blankets. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering. For a moment he thought she might wake properly, might actually see him, but she just turned her head away and mumbled something he couldn't make out. "What was that?" he asked, leaning closer. "Thirsty." The word was barely a whisper. Caleb grabbed the water cup, slid his hand behind her head to lift it. Her hair was matted and filthy, but he could see it had been dark brown once, maybe even pretty. She drank in small sips, her throat working, and he remembered what Doc had said about giving her too much too fast. "Slow," he murmured, "little bits at a time or you'll just sick it back up." She finished about half the cup before turning her head away. Her eyes opened, really opened, and this time when she looked at him, there was something like awareness behind them. "You're real," she said. "Real as anything." "I thought—" She swallowed, wincing. "Thought I dreamed you." "No dream, though this probably feels like a nightmare." The corner of her mouth twitched. It might have been trying for a smile. "Worse than nightmare. Nightmares end. He set the cup aside. How much do you remember? Her eyes went distant. The stage. We were moving fast, the driver was shouting, then gunfire. Everything tilting, breaking. I was thrown. She stopped, her breath catching. Mr. Porter, the merchant. He was kind to me during the journey. Is he? I'm sorry. She closed her eyes. A single tear tracked down her temple into her hair. And the driver? Him too. But not me. No, not you. Why not? It came out bitter. Would have been simpler. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Don't talk like that. Why not? Look at me. She tried to gesture at her legs and couldn't, her arms too weak. I can't even move. Can't feel anything below my knees except pain. What use am I like this? You're alive. That's use enough for right now. For you, maybe. You didn't travel 1,000 miles to end up a cripple in a broken shack. The word hung between them, ugly and true. Caleb wanted to argue, to tell her she wouldn't be a cripple, that she'd heal and walk and everything would be fine. But he'd never been good at lying, especially about things that mattered. No, he said finally. I didn't, but you're here anyway, and we'll deal with what that means when we get there. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face. You could just leave me, take me back to town, put me on a stage east when I'm well enough, send me back where I came from. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. I can't even think straight yet. Then don't think. Just rest. Rest. She almost laughed, but it came out as a cough that made her face contort with pain. When she could breathe again, she said, What day is it? Saturday. You've been here 4 days, 5 since the crash. 5 days. She processed that. Your daughter, June. She must be wondering. She knows I found you, that you're alive. That's not what I mean. Eliza's voice was getting weaker, the effort of talking draining her. She was expecting a mother figure. Instead, she's got a stranger who can't even stand up. What must she think? I haven't asked her. Maybe you should. Before Caleb could answer, her eyes closed again. This time it was just exhaustion, her breathing evening out into something like normal sleep. He sat back, running a hand through his hair. The conversation had worn him out almost as much as it had worn her out. The days fell into a pattern. Mornings were for changing bandages and getting food into her, broth mostly, sometimes bread soaked soft enough to swallow. Eliza was awake more often now, though she tired quickly. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? She'd come here to be a wife and mother, and now she was an invalid who might never walk again. He'd sent for a helpmeet, and now he was a nurse to a stranger who might resent him for not letting her die. But sometimes, in the quiet hours, she'd ask him questions about the ranch, about June, about the land. He'd answer as best he could, trying to paint pictures with words for a woman who hadn't seen any of it except through the window of a doomed stagecoach. What's she like? Eliza asked one evening. The sun was setting, painting the shack's interior in shades of orange. June, Caleb considered. Stubborn, smart as a whip, doesn't trust easy. Like her father, then. Her mother, actually. Sarah was the stubborn one. I just learned to get out of the way. You loved her. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. Yeah, I did. Must be hard trying to replace that. I'm not trying to replace anything. He met her eyes. I was honest in the letters. I need help with June, with the house. Someone I can count on. I wasn't looking for Sarah again. Just someone to do the work she did. That came out harsher than I think you meant it. Eliza sighed. Sorry. The laudanum makes me say things I'd normally keep inside. She paused. I wasn't looking for love either, you know. I just wanted... She trailed off. Wanted what? An escape. A fresh start. Something different than what I had. Her voice went quiet. You asked in one of your letters why I'd leave a good teaching position to come west. I never gave you the real answer. Caleb waited. Outside, crickets started their evening song. There was a man, Eliza said finally, in Philadelphia, a colleague at the school where I taught. We had an understanding, or I thought we did. Then his family made it clear I wasn't suitable. Wrong background, wrong connections. He chose them over me, and suddenly I was the woman who'd presumed too much. Every day walking into that school, seeing the pity in their eyes. She stopped, swallowing hard. I couldn't bear it. So when I saw your advertisement, I thought, here's a man who's being honest about what he wants. No pretense, no false promises. Just work and partnership and a child who needs raising. That seemed real. Everything else I'd known felt like performance. And now? Now I'm wondering if I escaped one kind of pity just to earn another. Nobody pities you. Don't they? The broken mail-order bride who can't even stand up? I'm sure the town is full of sympathy. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. The town doesn't know you. Neither do I. Not really. But what I've seen these past days, the way you fought to stay alive out there, the way you keep fighting now even when it hurts like hell, that's not something that deserves pity. That's something else entirely. She looked at him, and for a moment something passed between them. Not romance, nothing so simple. More like recognition. Two people who'd both been broken in different ways, trying to figure out if they could build something from the pieces. The moment broke when Eliza shifted her weight and gasped, her face going white. Caleb was on his feet instantly. What is it? The right leg. Something's wrong. Her voice was tight with pain. Feels like it's burning from the inside. Caleb pulled back the blanket carefully. The smell hit him first, sweet and rotten, unmistakable. Infection. The bandage on her right calf was seeping, a yellowish stain spreading through the cloth. He unwrapped it as gently as he could, and his stomach dropped. The wound had gone bad, really bad. The skin around it was swollen and red, hot to the touch. Angry red streaks ran up toward her knee, blood poisoning starting to spread. How long has it felt like this? He asked, keeping his voice level. Since this morning. I thought it was just the usual pain. Caleb rewrapped the leg and stood. I need to get Doc out here now. It's that bad? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Her face went carefully blank, the way people's faces did when they were trying not to panic. Will he have to take it? She asked quietly. I don't know. Please don't lie to me, not about this. Caleb met her eyes. I honestly don't know, but if it comes to that, if it's the leg or your life, you know what the choice has to be. Do I? Her voice was barely a whisper. What kind of life am I looking at, crippled on both sides, unable to work, unable to care for myself, a burden to everyone around me? You'd be alive. That's not the same thing. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but he'd seen enough of life's cruelties to know she wasn't. Sometimes survival wasn't victory. Sometimes it was just a longer, slower kind of dying. Let me get Doc first, he said. Then we'll worry about the rest. He rode for town in the dark, pushing Red harder than he should have. The gelding was tired, they both were, but the image of those red streaks spreading up Eliza's leg kept Caleb's heels in the horse's flanks. Blood poisoning moved fast. By morning, it could be in her whole system, and then no amount of sawing would save her. Doc Fairbanks was already in bed when Caleb pounded on his door, but he came quick enough once he heard the situation. They made the ride back in near silence, Doc's medical bag bumping against the saddle. The shack looked lonely in the moonlight, a single candle burning in the window where Caleb had left it. Inside, Eliza was awake, her face sheened with sweat. The fever was climbing again. Doc examined the leg without comment, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he sat back and looked at Caleb. It's bad, he said. Infection's deep. I can try to clean it out, drain the worst of it, but there's no guarantees if it doesn't respond in the next 12 hours. He didn't finish. And if you take the leg? Caleb asked. Better odds, not good odds, mind you. Amputation out here in these conditions is risky as hell, but better than letting the poison spread. How much time do we have to decide? Not much. Dawn, maybe. After that, the choice gets made for us. Doc looked at Eliza. It's her decision, though. Her body, her life. Eliza had been listening, her eyes moving between them. When Doc said that last part, she almost smiled. Thank you for that, at least. Most men wouldn't ask. I'm not most men. No, I'm starting to realize that. She took a breath, wincing. What would you do, doctor? If it was your leg? Doc rubbed his jaw, thinking. Honestly, I'd try the cleaning first. Give it 12 hours. But I'm a stubborn old fool who's made plenty of bad decisions in the name of stubbornness. A smarter man might choose differently. And you? Eliza looked at Caleb. What would you do? The question caught him off guard. Why does it matter what I do? Because you're the one who'll have to live with whatever I choose, you and June, if I end up dying here, or worse, living as an invalid who needs constant care. That's your burden as much as mine. Caleb wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it wasn't his choice to make, but there was truth in what she said, the kind of hard truth that couldn't be prettied up with nice words. I'd fight, he said finally. I'd fight as long as there was any chance of winning, even if the odds were bad. But that's me. I'm too stubborn to know when to quit. Runs in the family, apparently. Her smile was pained. All right, we try the cleaning. If I die, at least I'll die whole. Doc got to work. He sent Caleb outside, which was probably mercy. The sounds that came from the shack over the next hour would have broken a weaker man. Eliza screaming, then sobbing, then going silent in a way that was somehow worse. When Doc finally emerged, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his hands were shaking. Done, he said. Got out most of the infected tissue. Flushed it with carbolic, packed it clean. Now we wait. Will she make it? Ask me in 12 hours. They sat together on the porch while dawn broke over the wasteland, painting the rocks in shades of pink and gold. Inside, Eliza had finally passed out, the laudanum and pain taking her under. Caleb could hear her breathing, ragged but steady. She's tougher than she looks, Doc said after a while. Had to be, to survive what she's survived. That's not what I mean. Doc packed his pipe, lit it, took a long draw. Some people survive through luck. Others survive through pure meanness. She's the second kind. You can see it in her eyes. She's mad about what happened to her, and she's going to live just to spite the world that tried to kill her. Caleb thought about that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Depends. Anger can keep you alive when nothing else will, but it's a hard fuel to burn. Burns you up from the inside if you're not careful. Doc glanced at him. You ever think about what happens if she does pull through? What your life looks like with a woman who's got that much rage and that little to lose? One problem at a time. Fair enough. Doc stood, stretching his back. I'll check on her this evening. Meanwhile, you should sleep. You look like hell warmed over. Can't. Too much to do. Caleb, Doc's voice went firm. You're no good to her dead on your feet. Rest. That's not a suggestion. After Doc left, Caleb tried to follow the advice. He lay down on the floor next to Eliza's bed, using his saddle as a pillow. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those red streaks spreading, saw Eliza's face going white with shock, saw himself telling June that the woman who was supposed to be her new mother had died in a shack before they'd even properly met. Instead, he watched the sunlight move across the floor, listened to Eliza breathe, and counted the hours until Doc's deadline. She woke around midday, her eyes clearer than they'd been since the fever started. The first thing she did was look at her legs, as if checking they were both still there. Still attached, Caleb said. For now. She licked her cracked lips. Water? He helped her drink, and this time she managed half a cup without stopping. Progress, however small. How do you feel? He asked. Like I've been trampled by horses and then set on fire, but alive, I think. Is that good enough? It's a start. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I heard you and the doctor talking about anger. You were supposed to be unconscious. Came around toward the end. She shifted carefully, testing her body's limits. He's not wrong. I am angry. Furious, actually. At the men who did this, at the universe for letting it happen, at myself for being stupid enough to think I could start over somewhere new. That's not stupid, isn't it? Look where it got me. You're alive. Against odds that should have killed you 3 times over, you're alive. That's got to count for something. Does it? Or is it just prolonging the inevitable? She met his eyes. What if the infection comes back? What if I never walk again? What if I'm stuck like this, helpless and useless for the rest of whatever life I've got left? Caleb sat down in the chair beside her bed. Then we deal with it, same way we're dealing with this. Why? The question came out raw. Why do you care? You don't know me. I'm just some woman from a letter, someone who promised you things I probably can't deliver now. You could walk away. Take me to town, put me on a stage east when I'm well enough. Wash your hands of the whole mess. I could, he admitted, but I won't. Why not? He thought about that, trying to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. Because you got on that stage for us, for me and June. You packed up your whole life, left everything you knew, came out here on nothing but my word that there'd be something better waiting. That kind of trust, that kind of courage, that deserves more than me running scared first time things get hard. Eliza's eyes were wet. That might be the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. Then you've known the wrong people. She almost laughed, but it came out as a sob. Caleb reached over, took her hand, held it while she cried. Not the delicate crying of a lady in a drawing room, but the harsh, ugly crying of someone who'd been holding too much inside for too long. When she was done, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed. Sorry, that was human. That was human. He squeezed her hand once before letting go. You're allowed. The 12 hours came and went. The infection didn't spread. By evening, when Doc came back to check, the redness had started to fade. Not much, but enough. Enough to mean she might keep the leg, might keep both legs, might someday stand on her own 2 feet again. Well, I'll be damned, Doc said, rewrapping the wound with clean bandages. You might just be too stubborn to die after all, Miss Hartwell. Eliza, she corrected. If we're going to be fighting death together, you might as well use my first name. Eliza, then, Doc nodded. You're not out of the woods yet, but you're headed in the right direction. After he left, Caleb made soup from the supplies Hayes had brought, potatoes and salt pork and wild onions he'd found growing near the shack. It wasn't much, but Eliza ate 3 spoonfuls before exhaustion took her again. 3 spoonfuls more than yesterday. Small victories. He was learning to take them where he could find them. That night, lying on the floor listening to her breathe, Caleb thought about what Doc had said. About anger as fuel. About how it could burn you up. He thought about Eliza's question too. Why did he care? He still wasn't sure he had a good answer. Only that somewhere between finding her in that wash and fighting to keep her alive these past days, something had shifted. This wasn't about obligation anymore, or honoring a promise, or even about finding June a mother. This was about the woman in the bed behind him, who'd survived things that should have killed her and was still fighting, who'd been honest enough to admit her fears and brave enough to face them anyway, who'd come west looking for a fresh start and found hell instead, but refused to let that be the end of her story. If she lived, when she lived, because he was choosing to believe in when, things were going to be complicated. She'd need months of recovery, maybe longer. She might never walk without pain. The town would have opinions, and June would have questions, and there would be 1,000 practical problems to solve. But they'd solve them, somehow. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shack's loose boards. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Rain coming, maybe. The desert could use it. Caleb closed his eyes and, finally, slept. The rain came 2 days later. Not the gentle kind, but a violent desert storm that turned the world outside into sheets of water and mud. The shack's roof leaked in 4 places, and Caleb spent an hour moving Eliza's bed to the driest corner while she gritted her teeth and tried not to scream every time the motion jarred her legs. Sorry, he muttered for the 5th time, easing her down onto the relocated bed frame. Stop apologizing. Her voice was tight. You didn't make it rain. No, but I keep hurting you trying to help. Story of my life lately. She managed a weak smile. At least you're trying. That's more than most would do. The storm lasted through the night and into the next morning. Caleb caught rainwater in every container he could find, grateful for the fresh supply. They'd been getting low, and he'd been considering the long ride to the nearest creek. The storm solved that problem, even if it created new ones. Water pooled on the floor, dripping from the ceiling in a steady rhythm that made sleep nearly impossible. Around dawn, when the worst of it had passed, Eliza spoke into the half-darkness. Tell me about her, June. Caleb was surprised. They'd talked around his daughter before, but Eliza had never asked directly. What do you want to know? Everything. Anything. What does she look like? What does she love? What scares her? Eliza shifted, trying to get comfortable. It was a losing battle. If I'm going to be part of her life, if that's even still possible, I should know more than just her name and age. Caleb leaned back against the wall, thinking. She's small for 7. Dark hair, dark eyes. Looks like her mother, which I'm grateful for. Sarah was beautiful. And her personality? Stubborn as a mule. Smart. Too smart sometimes. She notices things most kids wouldn't. He paused. She's been through things no child should have to see. Watched her mother waste away with the fever. Had to grow up fast after that. Too fast. What does she do all day? Helps around the ranch when I let her. Feeds the chickens. Collects eggs. She can already ride better than most grown men. Reads when she's got books. Sarah taught her before she died. His voice went rough. But mostly she's just lonely. We're 12 miles from town, and there aren't many children her age out this way. She spends a lot of time talking to herself, making up stories. Eliza was quiet for a moment. She must hate me. Why would she hate you? Because I was supposed to fix things, make her life easier, give her a mother. Instead, I'm just another problem for her father to solve. She doesn't think like that. How do you know? You haven't seen her in over a week. That hit harder than Caleb wanted to admit. Hayes says she's doing all right. Hayes says what you need to hear. That's different than truth. Eliza turned her head to look at him, or tried to. The movement made her wince. When are you going to bring her here? Let her meet me? You're not ready for that. I may never be ready, but she deserves to know who I am. What happened? Keeping her away just makes it worse. Caleb wanted to argue, but he couldn't find solid ground. Eliza was right. June needed to see for herself, needed to understand that this woman wasn't a fairy tale or a solution to all their problems. She was just a person, broken and fighting, same as the rest of them. All right, he said finally. When Doc says you're strong enough, I'll bring her. Tomorrow. That's too soon. Tomorrow, Eliza repeated, firmer. I don't want more time to prepare pretty lies. If she's going to see me like this, better to get it over with. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having scrubbed the air clean. Caleb rode out early, the land transformed by rain into something almost green. Puddles reflected the sky, and the smell of wet sage filled his lungs. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in second chances. June was sitting on the Chen's porch when he arrived, her small frame hunched over a book. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and her face did something complicated. Relief and anger and fear all at once. You're alive, she said flatly. I'm alive. Caleb dismounted, tied Red to the porch rail. You all right, Junebug? Mrs. Chen makes me wear shoes inside, says it's civilized. June's tone made clear what she thought of civilization. And she won't stop asking if I'm sad. Are you? I don't know. Maybe. She closed the book. One of Sarah's old ones, Caleb noticed, the spine cracked from reading. Is she dead? No, she's alive. But she's hurt. Yes. June absorbed this, her face unreadable. How bad? Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with his daughter. Pretty bad. Her legs are broken, both of them. She's been real sick with fever and infection, but she's fighting hard, and Doc thinks she'll make it. Will she walk again? Don't know yet. Maybe, maybe not. June looked down at her book, running her fingers over the worn cover. So she can't be a mama. Not really. Can't cook or clean or do any of the things you said we needed. That's not... Caleb stopped because in a way June was right. The woman he'd sent for, the practical partnership he'd imagined, none of that existed anymore. Things changed, but she's still here, and she still wants to try. Why? Why would she stay when she's all broken like that? Wouldn't it be easier to just go home? Where's home for her now? She left Philadelphia to come here, sold most of what she owned, used up her savings on the trip. Caleb put his hand on June's shoulder. Besides, she made a promise, same as I did. Sometimes you keep promises even when they get hard. June was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to see her. That's why I'm here. But Junebug, you need to prepare yourself. She looks rough, real rough. And she's in pain, even when she tries to hide it. I'm not scared. Didn't say you were. Just want you to know what you're walking into. They rode back together, June sitting in front of Caleb on the saddle the way she had when she was smaller. She didn't talk much, but he could feel the tension in her small body. She was scared, no matter what she said. Scared of what she'd find, scared of what it meant for their future. The shack looked even more pathetic in daylight, especially with fresh eyes. Caleb saw it the way June must be seeing it: the sagging roof, the gaps in the walls, the general air of barely holding together. Not exactly the promising start to a new life. Inside, Eliza was awake, propped up on pillows Caleb had fashioned from folded blankets. She'd made an effort. Her hair was braided, her face washed as best as she could manage. But there was no hiding the bruises, the gaunt hollows under her eyes, the awkward angle of her splinted legs under the blanket. June stopped in the doorway, her hand tight in Caleb's. Eliza looked at the child for a long moment, then said, "You must be June." June didn't answer. She was staring, her eyes taking in everything: the makeshift bed, the bandages, the medicine bottles lined up on the windowsill. "It's all right," Eliza said gently. "You can look. I know I'm not what you were expecting." "You're hurt." June's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, very hurt. But I'm getting better, slowly. Papa says your legs are broken." "They are. Both of them." "Does it hurt?" "Yes, quite a lot, actually." June appreciated the honesty. Caleb could see it in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. She hated when adults talked down to her, treated her like she couldn't handle truth. "Are you going to die?" June asked. "I don't plan to, but I suppose none of us really know for certain, do we?" Mama didn't plan to die either, but she did anyway. Eliza's expression softened. "I heard about your mother. I'm sorry you lost her." "Everyone says that. Being sorry doesn't bring her back." "No, it doesn't. You're right." Eliza shifted slightly, wincing. "Would you like to sit down? There's a chair here. Unless you'd rather stay by the door." June looked at Caleb, who nodded. She crossed the room slowly and climbed into the chair, her feet dangling above the floor. Up close, she studied Eliza with the kind of frank curiosity only children could get away with. "You don't look like I thought you would," June said finally. "How did you think I'd look?" "Prettier, and not all broken." Eliza almost smiled. "Fair enough. I probably thought I'd look different too when I got here. Life has a way of changing plans." "Papa says you're a teacher." "I was, back in Philadelphia." "Can you still teach if you can't walk?" The question hung in the air. Caleb tensed, ready to intervene, but Eliza's face remained calm. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I suppose it depends on a lot of things. Whether my legs heal right, whether there's anyone who wants to be taught, whether I can find a way to make it work despite everything." She paused. "But I'd like to try. Teaching is the thing I'm good at. Maybe the only thing." "What did you teach?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography. A little bit of everything, really." June's interest sharpened. "Real geography? With maps?" "With maps, yes. I had a whole collection of them in Philadelphia. I couldn't bring them all, but I brought a few. They're—" She stopped, her face falling. "They were in my trunk on the stagecoach. I suppose they're gone now." "Not all of them," Caleb spoke up. "Hayes and his men recovered some of the luggage." "It was rifled through, but not everything was taken. I can check if your trunk made it." Eliza's eyes brightened, just a little. "Would you? I know it's silly to care about things like that when—" "It's not silly. Those maps matter to you. That makes them worth checking on." June was watching this exchange with sharp eyes. "If you have maps, could you show me places? Places that aren't here?" "I'd love to," Eliza said. "When I'm well enough to have them brought here, you and I can look at them together. I can show you Philadelphia and New York and places across the ocean. Would you like that?" June nodded, some of the wariness leaving her face. "We don't have any books about places, just stories." "Stories are important too, but yes, geography is wonderful. It helps you understand how big the world is, how many places there are beyond what you can see." They talked for a while longer, June's questions coming faster now that her initial fear had passed. What was Philadelphia like? Had Eliza seen the ocean? Did she know how to make bread? Could she read French? The questions ranged from practical to fantastical, and Eliza answered each one as well as she could, her voice growing tireder but never impatient. Finally, Caleb noticed Eliza's face going gray with exhaustion. "All right, Junebug, time to let Miss Hartwell rest." "Eliza," Eliza corrected softly. "You can call me Eliza, June. Miss Hartwell sounds too formal for people who are going to be living together." June considered this. "Eliza," she tried out. That's a strange name. It's short for Elizabeth. My father wanted something biblical. My mother wanted something she could shorten. They compromised. I like it. June slid off the chair. Will you still be here tomorrow? I'm not going anywhere for a while yet. Good. June paused at the door, then turned back. I'm glad you're not dead. It was, Caleb thought, possibly the highest compliment his daughter knew how to give. After they left, June was quiet on the ride back to the Chens. Caleb let her think, knowing she'd talk when she was ready. Finally, as they approached town, she said, "She's not what I expected." No? She's sad and scared, but she tries to hide it. Most people do. Mama never did. When she was sick, she'd cry right in front of me, said there was no point pretending things weren't hard. Caleb's throat tightened. Your mama was braver than most. Is Eliza brave? He thought about that. Yeah, I think she is. Different kind of brave than your mama, but brave all the same. What's going to happen to her, to us? I don't know, Junebug. We'll figure it out as we go. That's not very reassuring. It's honest, though. June leaned back against his chest. I guess that's better than lies. The days began to stretch into weeks. Eliza's strength returned in inches, frustratingly slow but undeniable. She could sit up without help now, could feed herself, could stay awake for hours at a time. The wounds were healing, the fever stayed gone, and Doc pronounced her out of immediate danger. But the legs were another story. The bones were knitting, but wrong. Even Caleb could see it, the left one healing with a visible bend, the right one stiff and resistant to any movement. Doc tried to adjust the splints, tried different positions, but Eliza's face when he manipulated the brakes told Caleb everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to end well. I can't feel my left foot, Eliza said one evening, her voice carefully neutral. Below the ankle, it's just nothing. Caleb set down the rabbit stew he'd been cooking. Since when? Few days now. I kept hoping it would come back, but it hasn't. Did you tell Doc? What's he going to do? The nerve's damaged probably when the stage rolled over my leg. Either it'll heal or it won't. She stared at the ceiling. Add it to the list of things I can't control. You're going to walk again. Caleb said it like a fact, willing it to be true. Maybe, but not the way I used to. Not the way anyone would want to. Her hands fisted in the blanket. I'm trying to make peace with it, but some days I just want to scream. So scream. What? Nobody's here but me. The shack's half a mile from anything. Scream if you want to. Eliza looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Then slowly she opened her mouth and let out a sound that was part rage, part grief, part pure frustration. It wasn't loud. She didn't have the breath for loud, but it was raw and real and seemed to shake something loose in her chest. When she finished, she was crying, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Caleb moved to the bed and sat on the edge, careful not to jostle her legs. He didn't say anything, just let her cry herself out. I hate this, she said finally. I hate being helpless. I hate depending on you for everything. I hate that I came here to help, and instead I'm just another burden. You're not a burden. Yes, I am. Don't lie to make me feel better. Caleb chose his words carefully. You're a responsibility I took on willingly. That's different than a burden. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks the same. Then you're not seeing straight. He met her eyes. A burden is something forced on you that you didn't want. You're not that. You're someone I chose to bring into my life, someone I made promises to. The fact that things went sideways doesn't change that. Your promises were to a different woman, a whole woman who could work and help and be useful. My promises were to you, the woman who wrote those letters, who was honest about wanting a fresh start, about being willing to work hard, about not expecting romance or easy answers. He paused. You're still that woman. The broken legs don't change who you are inside. Eliza shook her head. You don't know who I am inside? Neither do I anymore. Everything I thought I was, capable, independent, useful, all of that's gone. What's left? I guess we'll find out together. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. Finally, she said, Why are you doing this? Really? And don't tell me it's because of promises or duty or any of that. There's something else. I can see it. Caleb stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the rocks in shades of red and gold. You remember what you said in one of your letters about not being fragile? Yes. You were right. You're not fragile. Fragile things break and stay broken. You broke and kept fighting. You're still fighting now, even when it hurts like hell and you can't see a way forward. That's not fragile, that's steel wrapped in skin. That's a nice metaphor, but it doesn't answer my question. He turned back to face her. I'm doing this because I want to see what happens. When you can stand again, when you can walk again, and you will, even if it takes a year, I want to be there. I want to see who you become when you're not just surviving anymore. Eliza's eyes were bright with unshed tears. And if I disappoint you, then we'll deal with that too. The next week, Caleb made the decision to move Eliza back to the ranch. The shack had served its purpose, but she needed better care than he could provide in that falling down wreck. Doc agreed, helping to fashion a travois that could be pulled behind a horse. It wasn't comfortable, but it would get her there without killing her. The journey took 4 hours, Caleb walking beside Red the whole way, watching Eliza's face for signs of distress. She bore it better than he expected, her jaw tight, but no complaints passing her lips. June rode ahead on her pony, occasionally circling back to check on them. The ranch house appeared over a rise, and Caleb saw it through new eyes. The weathered wood, the patched roof, the general air of make-do that characterized everything he owned. Not impressive, but solid, built to last. He'd prepared a room for Eliza, the small bedroom off the kitchen that used to be Sarah's sewing room. It had a real bed with a cornhusk mattress, a window with glass that actually closed, and enough space to move around. Luxury compared to the shack. Getting her inside and settled took both Caleb and Doc. Eliza's face was gray by the time they had her in bed, but she managed a weak smile. Civilization, she murmured. I'd forgotten what it looked like. June appeared in the doorway, clutching one of her books. I picked flowers for the table. Papa said ladies like flowers. I do like flowers. Thank you, June. The girl edged closer. Are you staying now, for real? If your father will have me. Of course we will, June said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. You're part of the family now. It was said with such casual certainty that it left Eliza speechless. She looked at Caleb, her eyes asking if this was real, if the child meant it. Caleb nodded. You're home, for as long as you need. The first weeks at the ranch were an adjustment for everyone. Caleb had to learn to manage the house and the land simultaneously, while June discovered that having another person around meant less freedom to run wild. And Eliza had to face the daily reality of her limitations, needing help to bathe, to dress, to use the chamber pot. Every indignity chipped away at her pride until Caleb worried she'd break from the weight of it. But slowly, grudgingly, things began to shift. Eliza started teaching June in the afternoons, propped up in bed with books spread around her, math and reading and geography, just like she'd promised. June soaked it up like a sponge, her quick mind finding purchase in subjects she'd never had access to before. She's brilliant, Eliza told Caleb one evening. Reads at a level 3 years above her age, and her memory is remarkable. Gets that from her mother. Maybe. But she's got your stubbornness. Once she decides to understand something, she won't quit until she does. Caleb smiled. That does sound familiar. In the third week, a rider came from town with news that made Caleb's blood run cold. 2 men had been caught trying to sell stolen goods in Cheyenne, items that matched the manifest from the wrecked stagecoach. The sheriff there had arrested them and sent word down to Cedar Falls. They want you to come identify the items, Hayes said, standing in Caleb's kitchen with his hat in his hands. And they want to know if Miss Hartwell can identify the men. There's going to be a trial. Eliza had gone very still in her bed, listening. When? Month from now, maybe 6 weeks. They're still gathering evidence. I can't travel that far, not yet. They know that. Judge says he'll send a deputy to take your statement here, but they want you to see sketches of the men, see if you recognize them. I didn't see anyone clearly, Eliza said slowly. It all happened so fast, the shooting, the crash. I remember voices, maybe. One of them laughed, but faces. She shook her head. Try anyway, Hayes said gently. These men killed 2 people and left you for dead. They deserve to hang for it. The sketches arrived a week later. Eliza studied them for a long time, her face unreadable. Finally, she pointed to one. Him. Maybe. The shape of his jaw looks familiar, and the other one, the one who laughed, he had a scar here. She touched her own cheek. Neither of these drawings show that. I'll let them know, Hayes said. Every detail helps. After he left, Eliza was quiet for the rest of the day. That night, Caleb found her awake, staring at the ceiling. Can't sleep? He asked. Keep seeing it, the crash, Mr. Porter trying to run, the sound of the gunshots. She turned her head to look at him. Do you think they'll hang? If they're found guilty, probably. Good. The word was hard, final. They killed 2 people and destroyed my life. They deserve whatever they get. Caleb understood the anger. He felt it too, a cold fury at the men who'd done this. But he also knew that anger was a knife that cut both ways. Don't let it eat you up, he said quietly. Why not? It's all I've got right now. No, it's not. You've got June. You've got this place. You've got a future, even if it looks different than you planned. A future as what? A cripple who can't even stand without help. As a teacher, as someone June looks up to, as... He stopped, not sure how to finish. As what, Caleb? What am I to you? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Caleb thought about all the easy answers he could give. Partner, helpmeet, friend. But none of them felt adequate. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I want to find out. Eliza's expression softened slightly. That's either the bravest thing or the most foolish thing I've ever heard. Could be both. Could be. She managed a small smile. Wake me in an hour. June and I are working on long division tomorrow, and I need my wits about me. As the weeks turned into a month, something unexpected began to happen. Eliza started to fight back against her body's limitations, not with resignation, but with furious determination. She made Caleb bring her crutches Doc had fashioned from tree branches, even though standing sent white-hot pain through her legs. She practiced bearing weight for seconds at a time, then minutes, her face sheened with sweat and her hands shaking. You're going to hurt yourself, Caleb warned, watching her nearly fall for the 3rd time in an hour. I'm already hurt. Can't get much worse. She gritted her teeth and tried again, but she was wrong about that. One afternoon, trying to take a step without Caleb's support, her left leg buckled and she went down hard. The scream that tore from her throat brought both Caleb and June running. He found her on the floor, her face white with shock, fresh blood seeping through the bandage on her left leg. Damn it, she gasped. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Doc came that evening and rebandaged the wound. You tore some of the healing tissue. Set yourself back a couple weeks at least. He gave her a stern look. You keep pushing like this, you're going to do permanent damage. I have to try, Eliza shot back. I can't just lie here forever. Nobody's sane forever, but patience isn't your enemy here. It's your friend. After Doc left, Eliza refused to look at Caleb. She lay in bed with her face turned to the wall, her shoulders rigid. Go ahead, she said finally. Tell me I'm stupid, that I should have listened. I'm not going to tell you that. Why not? It's true. Caleb sat down in the chair beside her bed. Because I understand why you did it. You're scared that if you don't fight now, you never will. That if you accept the limitations, they'll become permanent. She turned to face him, her eyes red. Then why didn't you stop me? Because it wasn't my place to stop you, your body, your choice. Even if I think you're being reckless. I just want to be useful again. Her voice cracked. I want to stand up and teach June properly. I want to help with the house. I want to be something other than a burden. You teach June every day. That's useful. From a bed, like an invalid. So what? She's learning more now than she did in the 2 years before you came. You're giving her something I couldn't. Education, knowledge, a wider view of the world. That matters, Eliza. It matters a lot. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm going to walk again. I don't care what Doc says. I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to stand on my own 2 feet if it kills me. I know you will, but maybe ease up on the if it kills me part. We've fought too hard to keep you alive to have you throw it away on stubbornness. Despite herself, Eliza almost smiled. Says the most stubborn man I've ever met. Takes one to know one. That night, lying in his own bed across the hall, Caleb thought about the strange shape his life had taken. A month ago, he'd been a widower desperate for help. Now he was something else: caretaker, friend, witness to a woman remaking herself from broken pieces. It wasn't what he'd planned. But then again, nothing about the last month had gone to plan. Through the wall, he could hear Eliza shifting restlessly, unable to find comfort. He thought about going to check on her, but decided against it. She needed space to wrestle with her own demons. He couldn't fight all her battles for her, but he could be there when she needed him, and somehow that felt like enough. The town came to them on a Saturday morning in late October, 3 months after the crash. Caleb heard the wagons before he saw them, the rattle of wheels on hard-packed dirt, the voices carrying across the distance. He stepped out onto the porch, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept by the door. But it wasn't trouble. It was half of Cedar Falls, it seemed, arriving in a caravan of wagons and horses. Hayes led them, his weathered face split in what might have been a smile. "Morning, Caleb," he called out. "Hope you don't mind visitors." Caleb descended the porch steps slowly, confused. "What's all this about?" "Town meeting decided Miss Hartwell's been cooped up long enough. Figured if she can't come to us, we'd come to her." Hayes gestured to the wagons. "Brought supplies, food for a gathering. Mrs. Peterson insisted on bringing her apple pies." Behind Hayes, Caleb could see familiar faces: Ben and Lily Chen, Doc Fairbanks, the Millers, old widow Schultz, the Peterson family. Even a handful of ranch hands from neighboring spreads. Women were already climbing down from wagons, their arms full of covered dishes and blankets. Inside the house, Eliza had gone still. Caleb could see her through the window, sitting in the chair they'd moved to the parlor for her, June beside her with a book. The girl's eyes were wide, taking in the sudden crowd. "They're here to see you," Caleb said, stepping back inside. "You don't have to if you're not ready, but no." Eliza's voice was firm. "I can't hide forever. Help me stand." It took both Caleb and June to get her upright, her hands gripping the crutches Doc had improved with padded crosspieces. She was shaking with the effort, her face pale, but she held herself as straight as she could manage. The left leg wouldn't bear much weight. It never would, Doc had finally admitted, but she'd learned to balance on the right and the crutches. The first person through the door was Lily Chen, carrying a basket of what smelled like dumplings. She stopped short at the sight of Eliza standing there, then broke into a wide smile. "Miss Hartwell, you look wonderful." It was a lie. Eliza looked gaunt and tired, her dress hanging loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds. But it was a kind lie, and Eliza seemed to recognize it as such. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming. We should have come sooner, but some of us thought—" Lily paused, choosing words carefully. "We weren't sure you'd want company, after everything." "I wasn't sure either," Eliza admitted, "but I'm glad you're here." The gathering spilled out onto the porch and into the yard, people finding places to sit and talk. The women clustered around Eliza, bringing her into their circle with a gentleness that surprised Caleb. They asked about her recovery, her teaching of June, the plans for winter. Nobody mentioned the crash directly, as if by unspoken agreement they'd decided to let her bring it up if she wanted to. June was in heaven, surrounded by other children for the first time in months. She dragged them around the property, showing off the chickens and her pony and the barn cats, her voice carrying on the autumn air. Caleb found himself standing with Hayes and Doc, watching it all unfold. "Town's taking to her," Hayes observed. "That's good. She'll need support when the trial starts." "Trial's not for another month," Caleb said. "Still, people are already talking. Some saying she should testify in person. Make sure those men hang. Others saying she's been through enough, shouldn't have to relive it." "What's Eliza say?" "Haven't asked her yet. Wanted to let her settle in first." Doc Fairbanks took a sip from his flask and said, "She's stronger than she was. Physically, I mean. Still can't put full weight on that left leg. Probably never will. But the wounds are healed, the bones are set as well as they're going to be. She's not fragile anymore, if she ever was. She wants to walk unaided," Caleb said. "Keeps pushing herself even when it hurts." "That's pride talking. Nothing wrong with pride, long as it doesn't make her stupid." Doc glanced at Caleb. "You watching her close? Making sure she doesn't overdo it?" "I try. She doesn't always listen." "She's a woman, not a child. Can't expect her to take orders." Doc's eyes were shrewd. "Though I notice you trying to give them anyway." Caleb didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he watched Eliza across the yard, surrounded by women who were treating her like one of their own. She was smiling, a real smile, not the tight grimace she wore when the pain was bad. It changed her face entirely, made her look younger, almost happy. The afternoon wore on with an ease Caleb hadn't felt in months. Food appeared as if by magic: pies and roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from late gardens. People ate and talked and laughed, and for a few hours it felt like normalcy had returned. Then Martha Peterson, the banker's wife, sat down next to Eliza with what Caleb immediately recognized as purpose in her eyes. "Miss Hartwell, I hope you don't mind my asking, but have you given thought to the school?" Eliza looked puzzled. "What school?" "The town school. It's been closed since Miss Riley left to get married, 2 years ago now. The children have been making do with what their parents can teach them. But it's not the same as proper instruction." Martha leaned forward. "We heard you were a teacher back east. A good one, from what Caleb and June have said." "I was a teacher. I'm not sure I qualify anymore." "Why not? You still have your mind, don't you? Your voice, your knowledge." Martha's tone was practical, brooking no argument. "The school's just sitting there empty. One room, a dozen desks, a wood stove, no stairs to navigate, if that's what worries you." "Mrs. Peterson, I can barely stand for more than a few minutes at a time. How am I supposed to teach a full day of classes?" "Sit down. There's a chair. The children won't mind." Martha smiled. "Unless you think sitting makes you less of a teacher?" The challenge was gentle but clear. Eliza's eyes narrowed slightly, and Caleb recognized that look, the one that said she was being backed into a corner and didn't much like it. "I'd need books, supplies. The town would have to agree to pay for—" "Already discussed at the last town meeting. We have a small education fund, not much but enough for basics, and several families have books they'd be willing to donate." Martha patted Eliza's hand. "Think about it. The children need you, and I suspect you need them too." After the visitors left, the house felt strangely empty. June had worn herself out playing and gone to bed early without argument. Caleb helped Eliza back to her chair, noting how her hands shook from exhaustion. "That was overwhelming," she said, letting out a long breath. "Too much?" "No. Good overwhelming, I think. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be around people who weren't trying to fix me." Caleb started clearing dishes, his hands busy with familiar tasks. "What do you think about the school idea?" "I think Martha Peterson is a steamroller disguised as a polite society lady." "That's fair, but what do you think about actually doing it?" Eliza was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I can. It's one thing to teach June here, where she knows me and makes allowances. It's another to stand or sit in front of a room full of children who will see me as the crippled teacher who can't even walk properly. They'll see you as their teacher. The rest won't matter to them." "You don't know that. I know kids. They're more interested in what you can teach them than how you got to the front of the room." Eliza looked down at her hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough anymore?" "Then you'll be not good enough. But at least you'll have tried." Caleb set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her. "You told me once you weren't fragile. Prove it. Take the job." Her eyes flashed. "Using my own words against me. That's low. Is it working?" She almost smiled. "Maybe." The next week, Caleb drove Eliza into town to see the school. It was a rough ride, the wagon jarring over ruts that made her wince despite the blankets he'd packed around her. But she bore it without complaint, her eyes fixed on the approaching buildings with something like hunger. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple structure of whitewashed wood with a bell tower that looked like it might fall over in a strong wind. Inside, it was exactly as Martha had described. One room, a dozen small desks, a teacher's desk at the front, and a blackboard that had seen better days. It took both Caleb and Hayes to get Eliza up the 3 steps to the door. Once inside, she stood on her crutches, slowly scanning the room. Caleb watched her face, trying to read what she was thinking. "It's smaller than my school in Philadelphia," she said finally, "and rougher, but it has good light from those windows. And the blackboard is salvageable." She made her way carefully to the teacher's desk, running her hand over its scarred surface. "Someone carved initials here, and here. Students leaving their mark." "Is that a yes?" Hayes asked. Eliza looked at Caleb. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to settle something for her. It's a yes, but I'll need help getting here each day. And someone will need to keep the stove going. I can't manage that and teach at the same time. I can bring you mornings, pick you up afternoons, Caleb offered. And I'm sure we can find someone to tend the stove. Maybe one of the older boys. When can I start? How about after the first snow? Gives us time to gather supplies, spread the word to families. Say, late November? Eliza nodded slowly. Late November? That gives me time to prepare lessons, organize materials, and to practice standing for longer periods. Over the following weeks, the house transformed into a planning headquarters. Books appeared, donated by families across the county, some new, most worn from use, all precious. Eliza cataloged them, created lesson plans, sketched out a curriculum that would serve children from ages 6 to 14. She worked from dawn until she couldn't keep her eyes open, her energy returning in fits and starts. June was her first student, her guinea pig for testing methods. The girl bore it with good humor, even when Eliza made her redo arithmetic problems 3 times, or write out spelling words until her hand cramped. Is this what real school is like? June asked one afternoon, rubbing her sore fingers. Worse, usually. You have the advantage of being my only student right now. In a real classroom, you'd have to wait your turn for attention. I don't think I'd like that. Most children don't, but it teaches patience and how to work independently. Caleb watched this from the doorway, mending a harness and pretending not to listen. The easy rapport between Eliza and June had grown into something real, something that looked almost like family. When had that happened? He couldn't pinpoint a moment, but somewhere between the geography lessons and the shared meals and the simple routine of daily life, they'd become a unit. The thought should have scared him. Instead, it felt right. In early November, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. The trial was set for December 10th. The prosecution wanted Eliza to testify if she was able. If not, they'd accept a written statement, but her presence would strengthen the case considerably. Eliza read the letter 3 times, her face unreadable. Finally, she set it down and looked at Caleb. I should go. I should testify. That's a hard trip. 3 days by wagon, if the weather holds, longer if it doesn't. And December weather is unpredictable. I know, but those men killed Mr. Porter and the driver. They destroyed my legs, my life. If I don't face them, if I don't make them answer for what they did. She trailed off. You don't have anything to prove. You can write the statement and be done with it. This isn't about proving anything. It's about justice, and maybe about looking them in the eye and showing them I survived what they did to me. Caleb understood that need, had felt it himself in darker moments. All right, if you're determined to go, I'll take you, but we're doing it right. Proper wagon with springs, plenty of blankets, stops every few hours. You're not going to wreck yourself trying to get there. I wasn't planning to. Yes, you were. You always push too hard. She bristled. I push exactly as hard as I need to. You push until you break. There's a difference. They stared at each other for a long moment, the argument hanging between them. Then Eliza's expression softened. You're right. I do push too hard. But it's because if I don't, I'm afraid I'll stop entirely. That I'll accept the limitations and become the invalid everyone expects me to be. Nobody expects that. Don't they? I see how people look at me in town, the pity in their eyes, the careful way they talk around my injuries. They think I'm broken. You are broken, but broken doesn't mean useless, doesn't mean weak. Caleb pulled up a chair, sat down facing her. You survived something that should have killed you. You learned to walk again when Doc said you wouldn't. You're about to start teaching a whole school of children despite everything. If people pity you, that says more about them than it does about you. Eliza's eyes were bright. When did you get so wise? Sarah used to say the same thing, usually right before telling me I was also being an idiot about something else. That pulled a real laugh from her, startled and genuine. It was a good sound, one Caleb realized he'd been waiting to hear. The night before they were set to leave for Cheyenne, disaster struck in the form of Tommy Peterson riding up hell-bent with news. It's the Miller boy, he gasped, nearly falling off his horse. Jacob. He was climbing in the barn and fell. Broke his arm bad, bone sticking through. Doc's in Laramie delivering a baby, won't be back till tomorrow. His ma's beside herself, doesn't know what to do. Caleb was already moving, grabbing his coat, but Eliza's voice stopped him. Take me with you. What? No, you need to rest for the trip tomorrow. I know how to set a broken bone. Doc showed me when he was teaching me to change my own bandages. Take me with you, Caleb. I can help. He wanted to argue, but the certainty in her voice made him reconsider. It'll be rough getting you there and back. I don't care. That child is suffering. Let me help. They made it to the Miller farm in 20 minutes that felt like hours. Inside the small house, chaos reigned. The boy, maybe 10 years old, was on the kitchen table, his mother trying to hold him still while he screamed. His left arm was bent wrong, a white point of bone visible through torn skin, blood everywhere. Eliza's here to help, Caleb said to Mrs. Miller. She knows what to do. Mrs. Miller looked doubtful, but desperate. You sure? I'm sure. Eliza's voice was calm, authoritative. But I'll need your help, Mrs. Miller, and yours, she said to Caleb. Get me close to the table. I need to see the break clearly. They positioned her as best they could, supporting her weight since she couldn't stand unassisted for long. Eliza examined the boy's arm with careful hands, her face focused. It's a clean break, which is good, but we need to get the bone back in place and splinted quickly before infection sets in. Jacob, I know it hurts terribly, but I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? The boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. Good. Mrs. Miller, I'll need whiskey for cleaning the wound, clean cloth for bandages, and 2 straight pieces of wood for a splint. Caleb, you're going to hold Jacob still when I set the bone. This is going to hurt him, and he's going to fight. Don't let him. What followed was brutal. Eliza worked with steady hands, cleaning the wound despite the boy's screams, then pulling the bone back into alignment with a sickening crunch. Jacob passed out halfway through, which was probably mercy. She splinted the arm professionally, wrapped it tight, and sat back with sweat dripping down her face. Done, she said quietly. Keep it clean, change the bandages daily. If you see red streaks or smell anything foul, send for Doc immediately. But I think he'll be fine. Mrs. Miller was crying, holding her unconscious son. Thank you. Thank you so much. On the ride back, Eliza was silent. Caleb glanced at her several times, noting how she was trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion, and perhaps something else. You all right? He asked. I helped someone. For the first time since the crash, I actually helped someone. Her voice cracked. I was useful. You've been useful all along. No, I've been teaching. That's different. This was, I saw a problem I could solve, and I solved it. I wasn't just the crippled woman in the corner. I was someone who knew what to do. Caleb understood then what she'd been fighting against all these months. Not just the physical limitations, but the fear that she'd lost her purpose, her worth, that being broken meant being useless. You're going to be a hell of a teacher, he said. You think so? I know so. Those kids won't know what hit them. She smiled, and it was the first time Caleb had seen her smile without shadows behind it. The trial in Cheyenne was everything Eliza had feared and nothing like she'd imagined. The courtroom was packed, hot, despite the December cold outside. The 2 defendants sat at a table looking bored and defiant. One thin and weasel-faced, the other built like a bull with hands that could crush a man's skull. When Eliza entered on Caleb's arm, leaning heavily on her crutches, the room went quiet. She felt every eye on her, measuring her brokenness, her weakness. But she kept her chin up and made her way to the witness stand. The prosecutor was a sharp-faced man named Dalton who treated her with careful courtesy. He asked her to describe the attack, the crash, what she remembered of the men. I heard one of them laugh, she said, her voice steady. After the stage went over, a high sound, almost gleeful, and I saw them approach, 2 men, one tall and broad, the other shorter. They were checking the bodies. Did they see you? I don't know. I was partially trapped under luggage. I held very still, pretending to be dead. What happened next? They went through the stage, taking things. I heard them arguing about what to take, what to leave. Then they rode off. She paused. I waited until I couldn't hear the horses anymore. Then I started dragging myself away from the wreck. I knew if I stayed, I'd die there. How far did you drag yourself, Miss Hartwell? I don't know exactly. Several hundred yards, maybe. To a wash where there was shade. That's where Mr. Vance found me 3 days later. The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she couldn't have seen anything clearly, that her memory was confused by trauma. But Eliza held firm. When he asked about her current condition, clearly trying to paint her as an unreliable witness, she met his eyes directly. I have 2 crushed legs that barely work. I can't stand without help, can't walk without crutches, and I live with pain every single day. But my mind is perfectly clear, sir. I remember exactly what happened, and I remember those men leaving me to die. The jury watched her with something like awe. Here was a woman who'd survived the impossible, sitting straight back despite obvious pain, refusing to be dismissed or diminished. When she finished testifying and Caleb helped her down from the stand, she was shaking but unbowed. They sat in the back of the courtroom for the rest of the trial, listening to other witnesses, to the evidence being presented. The stolen goods had been found in the defendant's possession. Their story about finding the items abandoned had more holes than a sieve. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced both men to hang. As they led the prisoners out, the bull-faced one looked directly at Eliza. "Should have made sure you were dead," he said, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "But you didn't," Eliza replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And now you'll hang for it." Outside the courthouse, Caleb helped her into the wagon, noting how her hands were still trembling. "You did good in there." "I don't feel good. I feel angry and tired, and like none of this brings back Mr. Porter or the driver or gives me back my legs." "No, but it means they'll pay for what they did. That's something." "Is it enough?" Caleb didn't have an answer for that. The ride home took 4 days instead of 3, snow slowing their progress. But Eliza bore it better than expected, wrapped in blankets and losing herself in thought. When they finally reached the ranch, June came running out to meet them, her face alight with relief. "You're back. Mrs. Chen said you might not make it through the snow." "We made it." Eliza let Caleb lift her down from the wagon, then ruffled June's hair. "And I have stories to tell you about the city." "Real stories? About buildings and crowds and everything?" "Real stories. But first I need to sit down. My legs are screaming at me." Inside, the house was warm, a fire blazing in the hearth. Someone, probably Lily Chen, had left a covered dish on the table, the small kindnesses of neighbors who were becoming friends. That night, after June had gone to bed and Caleb had finished his evening chores, he found Eliza sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much in my head." She looked up at him. "I keep thinking about what that man said, about how they should have made sure I was dead. He was just trying to hurt you one last time. I know, but it made me realize something." She paused, choosing words carefully. "I spent so long being angry about what happened, about what they took from me. But maybe what they really did was force me to become someone different, someone stronger, in ways I didn't know I could be." "You were always strong." "No, I was competent, capable. But strength, real strength, I didn't know what that was until I had to drag myself across the desert with broken legs, until I had to learn to walk again, until I had to stand in front of that courtroom and refuse to be broken." She met his eyes. "They tried to destroy me, but I'm still here. And I'm going to teach those children, and I'm going to build a life here, and I'm going to prove that what they did to me wasn't the end of my story. It was just a terrible chapter." Caleb sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met." "Even braver than Sarah?" The question could have been jealous or bitter, but it wasn't. It was genuine curiosity. "Different kind of brave," Caleb said honestly. "Sarah was brave in accepting what she couldn't change. You're brave in refusing to accept it." Eliza smiled slightly. "I'll take that as a compliment." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in white. Somewhere in that silence, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but the recognition that they'd built something real from impossible circumstances. A partnership. A family, maybe. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The schoolhouse opened on a Monday morning in late November with 8 students and a teacher who could barely stand. Caleb drove Eliza into town before dawn, the wagon loaded with books and slate boards, and the nervous energy of a woman about to test whether she still had value beyond survival. "What if they don't listen to me?" she asked for the third time, gripping her crutches. They'll listen. What if the parents complain that they're paying for a cripple to teach their children? Then they're idiots, and you'll prove them wrong. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the schoolhouse. You ready? Eliza looked at the building, its windows dark in the pre-dawn gloom. No, but I'm doing it anyway. He helped her inside, got the stove going, arranged her desk so she could reach everything from her chair. By the time the first students arrived, the Peterson twins, shy and wide-eyed, Eliza was seated at the front of the room, her crutches leaning against the wall behind her, her face composed. June came in next, trying to act like she hadn't been in this exact room a dozen times, helping prepare. She took a seat in the middle, her presence a small anchor of familiarity. The other students filtered in over the next 20 minutes. The Miller boy, his arm still splinted but healing clean. 2 ranch children Caleb didn't know well. A brother and sister with matching red hair and freckles. The Chen twins, who spoke more Chinese than English at home but were eager to learn. And finally, Tommy Peterson's younger sister Clara, who stared at Eliza's crutches with open curiosity. When the last child was seated, Eliza stood, carefully, using the desk for support. The room went quiet. Good morning, she said, her voice carrying despite the tremor Caleb could hear in it. My name is Miss Hartwell, and I'm your new teacher. Some of you may have heard about what happened to me, and you can see for yourselves that I walk differently now. If you have questions about that, you can ask them once, and I'll answer honestly. After that, we don't talk about it again. We're here to learn, not to discuss my legs. Understood? 8 heads nodded. Good. Now, I need to know where each of you stands with your education. We're going to start with reading. I want each of you to take turns reading from this book. She held up a worn copy of McGuffey's Reader. Don't be nervous if you struggle. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to teach. Caleb slipped out then, leaving her to it. He had ranch work waiting, but he couldn't shake the image of her standing there, broken but unbowed, scared but refusing to show it. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Caleb would drive Eliza to school each morning, pick her up each afternoon. In between, she taught reading and arithmetic, geography, and history, pushing her students harder than they'd ever been pushed. The children complained sometimes. Too much homework, too difficult. Why did they need to know about ancient Rome anyway? But they learned. And slowly, grudgingly, they began to respect the woman in the chair at the front of the room who expected more from them than they knew they could give. At home, something else was shifting. The easy partnership between Caleb and Eliza had deepened into something neither of them quite knew how to name. They'd fall into conversations that stretched past midnight, talking about everything and nothing. She'd tell him about Philadelphia, about the bookstores and theaters, and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw you as a useful commodity rather than a person. He'd tell her about the years after Sarah died, about learning to be both mother and father to June, about the crushing weight of isolation. Do you ever regret it? She asked one night. They were sitting on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching stars that seemed close enough to touch. Writing that advertisement? Bringing me here? Caleb thought about that. I regret what happened to you, the crash, the pain, all of it. But bringing you here? No, I don't regret that. Even though I'm not what you ordered? You're better than what I ordered. You're real. Eliza turned to look at him, her face half shadowed in the starlight. You say things like that and make it very difficult for me to keep my distance. Who says you have to keep your distance? Common sense. Self-preservation. The fact that you're my employer and I'm living in your house and we're already breaking about 6 different rules of propriety. I don't care much for rules of propriety. I noticed. She smiled, but it faded quickly. Caleb, I need to know something. When you look at me, what do you see? He could have given her the easy answer, a teacher, a friend, someone who helped with June. But she deserved better than easy. I see someone who refuses to quit even when quitting would be easier, someone who dragged herself hundreds of yards across the desert with crushed legs because the alternative was dying. Someone who stood in a courtroom and looked her attackers in the eye. Someone who gets up every morning and teaches children despite the pain, despite the limitations, despite everything telling her she should just give up. He paused. I see the strongest person I've ever known, and somewhere along the way I started seeing someone I can't imagine my life without. Eliza's breath caught. That sounds dangerously close to a declaration. Maybe it is. I'm broken, Caleb. I'll never be whole again. I can't run or dance or even walk without help. What kind of life is that for you? The kind I want, if you'll have me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I came here expecting a business arrangement, a transaction. Work for shelter, teaching for security. I never expected—" She trailed off. "Neither did I, but here we are." "Here we are," she echoed. Then softer. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of this. Of caring about someone again. The last man I cared about chose his family's expectations over me. What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake? That you tied yourself to damaged goods when you could have found someone whole?" Caleb reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, and he wrapped both his hands around them. "You're not damaged goods. You're a woman who survived something that should have killed her. And if I wanted someone else, I'd have looked for someone else. I want you. Broken legs and stubborn pride and all the rest of it. You might be the most foolish man I've ever met." "Probably, but I'm your fool if you'll have me." Eliza laughed then, a sound caught between tears and joy. "When did you become a romantic?" "I'm not romantic. I'm practical. And practically speaking, you're already living here, already part of this family. Might as well make it official." That is possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. It wasn't a proposal, not yet. Caleb stood, then dropped to one knee in front of her chair. "Eliza Hartwell, will you marry me? Not because I need a housekeeper or June needs a mother, but because I choose you. Because I want to spend my days watching you terrorize school children and my nights arguing with you about books and everything else. Because somewhere between the line shack and here, you became necessary to me." Eliza was crying now, tears tracking down her face in the starlight. "Yes, yes, you impossible man. I'll marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, mindful of all the ways she'd been broken and all the ways she'd healed. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It was better, real and earned and built on months of shared hardship. When they pulled apart, Eliza was smiling through her tears. "June is going to have opinions about this. June's been planning our wedding since October. I guarantee she's already picked out her dress." They were right about that. When they told June the next morning, the girl's face split into a grin so wide it looked like it might crack her face in half. "Finally," she said, "I was worried you two would keep dancing around it forever." "We were not dancing around anything," Eliza protested. "You were absolutely dancing around it. Mrs. Chen has a betting pool going about when Papa would finally ask you. I put my money on Christmas, so you're 2 weeks early, but I'll take it." Caleb groaned. "The whole town knows?" "The whole town has eyes, Papa, and you two aren't exactly subtle." The wedding happened on a cold January morning with half the town crammed into the church. Eliza wore a simple dress that Lily Chen had altered to accommodate her seated position during most of the ceremony. She stood for the vows, though, leaning on Caleb's arm, her legs shaking with the effort, but her voice steady. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. June was crying, happy tears for once, and even Hayes looked suspiciously misty-eyed. The reception was held at the schoolhouse, the desks pushed aside to make room for dancing and food and celebration. Eliza couldn't dance, but she sat in a place of honor and watched Caleb spin June around the floor, watched the community that had taken her in celebrate this strange, hard-won happiness. Martha Peterson sat down next to her, balancing a plate of cake. "You've done well for yourself, my dear." "Have I? I sometimes wonder if Caleb got the short end of this arrangement." "Nonsense. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. And June, well, June hasn't been this happy since her mother was alive." Martha patted Eliza's hand. "You built something real here. Against terrible odds, you built something real. That's worth celebrating." 2 months into their marriage, trouble arrived in the form of a well-dressed man on an expensive horse. Caleb was mending fence when he saw the stranger approaching, and something in his gut went cold. Men who dressed that well rarely brought good news to small ranches in Wyoming. The man dismounted with practiced ease and extended his hand. "Caleb Vance? I'm Marcus Hartwell, Eliza's brother." Caleb shook the offered hand, his mind racing. Eliza had mentioned a brother once, briefly, in the context of family she'd left behind, but she'd made it sound like that bridge was burned beyond repair. Your sister's at the school, teaching. I know. I stopped there first. She sent me here. Marcus's expression was hard to read. We need to talk about Eliza's future. Inside the house, Marcus refused the offered chair and stood by the window, looking out at the sparse landscape. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending I'm here for a friendly visit. Our father died 3 weeks ago, left a considerable estate. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be. He was a hard man who made hard choices. Marcus turned to face Caleb. Eliza's share of the inheritance is substantial, enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life, with proper medical care, in a city with actual doctors who specialize in her kind of injuries. Caleb felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying she has options now. She doesn't have to stay here teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, married to... He stopped himself. Married to a rancher who can barely keep his head above water, Caleb finished. Go ahead and say it. I was going to say married to anyone out of obligation rather than choice. Look, Mr. Vance, I'm not trying to insult you, but my sister nearly died out here. She's crippled, in constant pain, living a life that's a shadow of what she could have had. Our father may have been difficult, but his death freed up resources that could give her a real life again. This is a real life. Is it? Or is it just survival with prettier curtains? Marcus's voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. I'm offering her a chance to come home, to Philadelphia, where she can have the best doctors, where she won't have to work herself to exhaustion every day, where she can live in comfort and dignity. You'll have to ask her what she wants. I won't speak for my wife. I already did ask her. She told me to talk to you. Marcus studied Caleb. She said whatever you decide, she'll abide by. That stopped Caleb cold. That doesn't sound like Eliza. No, it sounds like a woman who's grateful to you for saving her life and feels like she owes you more than she can repay. Marcus moved toward the door. I'll be at the hotel in town for 3 days. If she wants to come with me, I'll arrange everything. Transportation, medical care, a fresh start. All she has to do is say yes. After Marcus left, Caleb sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. He thought about the conversation, about what Marcus had said, about options and obligations, and the difference between a life chosen and a life accepted because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. When Eliza came home that afternoon, he was still sitting there. Marcus told you about the inheritance, she said, not a question. He did. Told me you could have a better life in Philadelphia. Better doctors, more comfort, less work. And what do you think I should do? Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd survived the impossible, who'd rebuilt herself from broken pieces, who'd become essential to him and June in ways he couldn't articulate. I think you should do what makes you happy, not what you think you owe me, not what's easier, but what actually makes you happy. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. It's the only answer that matters. He stood up, crossed to where she stood leaning on her crutches. If you want to go to Philadelphia, if you want to try for better medical care, if you want a life that's easier than this, I won't stop you. I won't even try to convince you to stay, because you deserve to choose your own life, Eliza, not have it chosen for you by circumstances or guilt or obligation. And June? June will survive. She survived losing her mother. She'll survive this if she has to. Eliza's eyes were wet. You're trying to make it easy for me to leave. I'm trying to make it possible for you to stay, because if you stay out of guilt or duty, eventually you'll resent it, resent me, and I can't live with that. He took her hand. But if you choose to stay, if you choose this life knowing you have other options, then I'll know it's real, that we're real. You're asking me to choose between comfort and you. No, I'm asking you to choose what you actually want. Not what's practical, not what makes sense on paper, but what you want in your gut. She pulled away from him, moved to the window where Marcus had stood earlier. Outside, the Wyoming wind was picking up, driving dust across the yard. It was a harsh landscape, unforgiving and beautiful in equal measure. I hated you at first, she said quietly. Did you know that? When I first woke up in that line shack, when I realized what my life had become, I hated you for not letting me die out there. It would have been easier, cleaner. I know. But you kept showing up, kept taking care of me, kept pushing me to fight when all I wanted was to give up. You and June, you didn't let me quit. Even when I was horrible to you, even when I pushed back, you just kept believing I could be more than broken. She turned to face him. Philadelphia would be easier. I could have servants to help me, doctors to manage the pain, a life where I wouldn't have to struggle every single day. But it wouldn't be this. This being what? A family, a purpose. 8 children who look at me and see their teacher, not their pity case. A daughter who needs me. A husband who... She stopped, swallowed hard. A husband who sees me as whole even when I'm shattered. Caleb crossed the room, pulled her into his arms. You're not shattered, you're different. But different isn't broken. I'm choosing this, she said against his chest. I'm choosing you and June and this impossible, difficult, beautiful life. Not because I owe you, not because I have to, but because this is where I want to be. When Marcus came by the next morning for her answer, Eliza met him on the porch, standing with Caleb's support on one side and her crutches on the other. I'm staying, she said simply. Marcus looked disappointed but not surprised. The money's still yours. Father left it in trust. You can access it whenever you need it. I know, and I appreciate that. But my life is here now. Even though it's harder than it needs to be. Especially because it's harder. Easy doesn't mean better, Marcus. You should know that. Her brother studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You look different than when I saw you last. Stronger, somehow. I am stronger. Turns out nearly dying and learning to walk again builds character. Or breaks you entirely. Could have gone either way. I got lucky. She glanced at Caleb. Or maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was just stubborn people refusing to let me quit. Marcus mounted his horse, then paused. If you ever change your mind, I won't. But thank you for coming, for giving me the choice. After he rode away, Eliza sagged against Caleb. The effort of standing had cost her, and he could see the pain written across her face. Let's get you sitting down, he murmured. In a minute. I want to stand here a little longer. Want to look at this land I chose over comfort and sense and everything practical. They stood together on the porch, looking out at the scrubland and distant mountains, at the life they'd built from the wreckage of different disasters. It wasn't perfect. It was hard, and would stay hard, full of pain and struggle and daily battles against limitations that would never fully disappear. But it was theirs, chosen and fought for and real. That spring, Eliza's school grew to 15 students. Word had spread about the crippled teacher who didn't accept excuses, who pushed her students harder than anyone expected, who somehow made learning feel urgent and vital instead of tedious. Families from outlying ranches started sending their children, boarding them in town during the week so they could attend. June flourished under Eliza's teaching, her quick mind finding purchase in subjects that challenged her. By May, she was reading at a level that would shame most adults and doing mathematical calculations that made Caleb's head hurt. She's going to outgrow this school soon, Eliza told him one evening. They were sitting on the porch again, their usual spot. Another year, maybe 2, and I won't have anything left to teach her. What happens then? We find a way to send her to a real school. Maybe boarding school back east, or a tutor who can take her further. Eliza's voice was firm. She's too smart to waste on just surviving out here. She deserves a real education. That costs money we don't have. The inheritance from my father. We can use that. Caleb started to protest, but she cut him off. It's my money, and I'll spend it how I like. And I like the idea of giving June opportunities I never had, of making sure one more brilliant girl doesn't get lost because she was born in the wrong place. He couldn't argue with that. Wouldn't, even if he could. In June, Doc Fairbanks examined Eliza's legs and delivered news that was both expected and still hard to hear. The left one's as healed as it's going to get. Nerve damage is permanent. You'll never have full feeling below the knee. Right leg's better, but you'll always have limited range of motion. Walking without support isn't going to happen, Eliza. I'm sorry. I know, I've known for months, but thank you for being honest. After Doc left, she was quiet for a long time. Caleb waited, knowing she needed to work through it herself. Finally, she said, I thought I'd made peace with it. But hearing it said out loud, having it confirmed as permanent, that's harder than I expected. You're allowed to grieve what you lost. Am I? Because it feels selfish. I'm alive, I'm walking with help. I have a life and a family and work I love. Grieving the ability to walk unaided seems petty. It's not petty, it's human. You can be grateful to be alive and still mourn what the crash took from you. Both things can be true. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a while, watching the sun set over the land they'd chosen. "I'm not who I was in Philadelphia," she said eventually. "That woman died in the desert with her crushed legs, but I'm also not sure who I am now. I'm still figuring it out. Take your time. We've got years for you to figure it out." "Do we? You don't think you'll get tired of a wife who can't dance at town socials or help with hard ranch work?" "I think I'll get tired of you asking me that question when I've already shown you the answer every day for a year." He turned her face toward his. "I chose you, present tense, ongoing action, not chose once in the past. I choose you today, and I'll choose you tomorrow, and the day after that. Your legs don't figure into that decision except as evidence of how tough you are. You're too good to me. No, I'm exactly as good as you deserve, which is pretty damn good." That night, lying in bed, Eliza said something that had been building for months. "I want to expand the school. Add a second room, maybe hire another teacher for the younger children. There's need for it. Families keep asking if I can take more students." "That's a big undertaking." "I know, but I've been thinking about my father's inheritance, about the best way to use it, and I can't think of anything better than education, than giving these children the tools to be more than what their circumstances dictate." Caleb rolled over to face her in the darkness. "You're talking about building a legacy." "I'm talking about making this place better than I found it. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Leave things a little better for the people who come after us?" He thought about that, about June and the other children, about the future taking shape in Eliza's mind. "All right, let's do it. Let's build your school." The expansion took 8 months of planning and building and fundraising. The town rallied around the project, donating labor and materials. By spring of the following year, Cedar Falls had a proper school building with 2 rooms, 15 desks, a small library, and Eliza Vance's name on a brass plaque by the door. On opening day, 23 children showed up. Eliza had hired a younger teacher, fresh from normal school back east, to handle the primary grades. She took the older students herself, pushing them through history and literature and mathematics with the same fierce determination she'd brought to surviving the desert. Standing at the door that first day, watching children stream in, she felt something click into place. This was what she'd been moving toward all along, not the mail-order marriage, not the partnership with Caleb, but this. A place where she mattered, where her broken body didn't define her worth. That evening, exhausted but satisfied, she sat at dinner with Caleb and June and talked about the day. June was excited about the new students, about the possibilities. Caleb was quiet, but Eliza could see the pride in his eyes. "What are you thinking?" she asked him. "That you did it. Built something lasting. We did it. You helped every step. I hauled some lumber and wrote some checks. You're the one who made it happen." June looked between them, then said something that made them both stop. "Mama would have liked you, Eliza. You and her, you're both the kind of person who doesn't quit." It was the first time June had compared Eliza to her mother without sadness attached. The acknowledgement that loving Eliza didn't mean forgetting Sarah, that both women could exist in her heart without competition. Eliza's eyes filled. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." The years that followed weren't easy. Eliza's pain never fully went away. Some mornings she could barely get out of bed, the old injuries flaring with weather changes or overuse. But she learned to work around the limitations, to pace herself, to ask for help when she needed it, instead of pushing until she broke. The school thrived. Children who would have grown up barely literate learned to read and write and think critically. Some went on to higher education, a few even to university. Every success felt personal to Eliza, proof that she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into something good. June grew into a formidable young woman, sharp-minded and sharp-tongued, with her mother's beauty and her father's stubbornness and Eliza's love of learning. At 16, she won a scholarship to a women's college back east, the same one Eliza had attended. The day she left, Eliza cried harder than she'd cried since the crash. "She'll be back," Caleb said, holding her. "She's got too much of both of us in her to stay away forever." "I know, but I'm going to miss her terribly." "Me too. But this is what we wanted for her, A life bigger than this place. Eliza nodded, wiping her eyes. Doesn't make it easier. No, but it makes it right. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb took Eliza back to the line shack where he'd first brought her after the crash. It was falling down now, nearly beyond repair, but it still stood. "Why are we here?" she asked, leaning on his arm. "Because this is where it started. Not the marriage, not the partnership, but the choice. Where you chose to fight instead of giving up." Eliza looked at the sagging structure, remembering those fevered days, the pain, the fear, the anger. "I hated this place." "I know, but it saved your life. And in saving your life, it gave me mine back too." "How do you figure that?" "Before you came, I was just going through motions, taking care of June, working the ranch, existing. But I wasn't living. You reminded me what it felt like to have purpose beyond just surviving another day." They stood together in the afternoon sun, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. It wasn't the story either of them had planned, but it was real and hard-won and completely theirs. "I'm glad I got on that stagecoach," Eliza said finally. "Even knowing what would happen, even knowing the pain and the struggle, I'd do it again. Because it brought me here, to you and June and the life we built. That's either very brave or slightly insane." "Probably both," she smiled, "but that seems to be my specialty." They left the line shack standing, a monument to the place where death had come looking, and found stubborn life instead. On the ride home, Eliza thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived in Wyoming, desperate for a fresh start, running from heartbreak, with no idea what she was walking into. That woman was gone, burned away in the desert sun, and remade in the crucible of survival. The woman she was now had scars, inside and out. She limped, literally and metaphorically. She had nightmares sometimes about the crash, about those 3 days alone in the wash, about the sound of gunfire and men laughing. But she also had strength she'd never known she possessed, courage tested by fire, and a life she'd chosen rather than one chosen for her. Some people thought strength meant not breaking, but Eliza had learned different. Real strength was breaking and deciding to heal anyway. It was getting up every morning despite the pain and choosing to keep fighting. It was looking at a life that would never be easy and saying yes anyway, because easy wasn't the same as worth living. She taught that lesson to her students without speaking it directly, showed them through her example that limitations didn't define you, that circumstances didn't determine worth, that you could lose everything and still build something beautiful from what remained. And on nights when the pain was bad, when she lay awake remembering what it felt like to walk without crutches, to run, to dance, on those nights Caleb would hold her hand in the darkness and remind her of all the ways she'd already won, all the battles fought and survived, all the impossible things she'd accomplished just by refusing to quit. The desert had tried to kill her. Men had tried to destroy her. Her own body had betrayed her in ways that would never fully heal. But she was still here, still fighting, still building and teaching and loving with everything she had. That was the story she told herself in the dark hours. Not the story of a woman broken by tragedy, but of a woman who'd been tested beyond any reasonable measure and emerged not unscathed, but undefeated. Who'd taken the worst hand life could deal and played it into something worth having. Some people got their happy endings wrapped in silk and delivered on silver platters. Eliza's came covered in dust and blood, hard won and paid for in pain and persistence. But it was hers, completely, utterly hers. And that, she'd learned, made all the difference.